Hey, welcome to the Super Good Camping Podcast. My name is Pamela.
I'm Tim.
And we are from supergoodcamping.com. We're here because we're on a mission to inspire other families to enjoy camping adventures such as we have with our kids. Today's guest has been making maps of Ontario's provincial park backcountry areas since 2012. If you've done any backcountry camping in an Ontario park, you've likely heard of him and might own a map or 7, I don't know how many we have, of his. Please welcome Jeff McMurtry, the gentleman behind Maps by Jeff. Yay, welcome,
Hello.
Jeff.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for dropping by for a chat, man. I think I'll go on record and say I own 11 of your maps, something like that. So I have issues. We've talked about this before.
As long as you keep making them, he'll keep buying them.
Yeah, I will keep buying them, yes. And I'm happy to do it. I love your maps. I love maps, period. I have a thing about maps. But every time, so quick story, before we get into the intro of how exactly you got into making maps. Our eldest and I he's my backcountry. I'm pointing. He's in the bedroom behind us. He's my backcountry partner, and we did a trip into Killarney in and around Keys, Norway, Killarney, did a whole thing in and around there. I looked at the portage and went, great, no problem. Didn't really pay all that much attention. Certainly wasn't looking at topo lines. After we did the portage, I went back and went, that was crazy. What was that? And then I saw the 2 exclamation points, because that's what you used to do in the old days in Unlostify. And I went, oh. So now I'm far more attentive to the lines and how closely spaced they are. Like I totally wasn't thinking. I was like, oh yeah, cool, great. That's where he says the portage is, and that's exactly where the portage was. Holy crap, was it brutal portage though, because it had 2 exclamation points, right? So there you go. You've made me a better map reader, like right out of the gate. Thank you so much for that. Question for you. So 2012, if I'm not mistaken, I read something about like you basically finished school and went, okay, I'm going to make maps. What prompted you to do that? What was, I don't know, what was the thing that went, yeah, maps is where I'm going to end up?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I didn't ever say maps are where I want to end up. I sort of like fell into it by accident, really. So my story was that, yeah, I mean, I was a paddler, I guess, since I was young. It was involuntary at first, right? Like, Dad's like, we're going paddling. Because, he'd done it back when he was younger in the 80s and stuff. And so, yeah, it was me, my brother, my dad. And first year we did like a week in Algonquin. And then every year after we just get longer and longer and longer. But then I guess like the first time where I'd gone on a trip without Dad was high school, grade 10. So I went with my partner. And first time I thought, okay, let's try backpacking because I've never done that before. And then I realized, it's kind of like a long portage, the portage that never ends. And you see the water, and it's like, no, we're not going to go see the water. We're going to leave the lake. So that was interesting because we definitely weren't prepared for, we packed like we were portaging basically, right? And so year after, I thought, okay, I promise it's going to be better. We're going to go paddling. Paddling's great. And I thought, let's go to the same area as the backpacking trail, but by canoe. I'd never been there before, and so it would be kind of neat because it'd be like same area, but this different perspective. We can actually see water for once, right? And as it turned out, the official sort of Algonquin map was very, very, very wrong. There were campsites on the wrong side of the lake. There were portages on the wrong side of the lake. There were portages missing. There was a lake with like the wrong number of bays. So that made for some fun navigating. And so it was kind of like, after the trip, I got back, and so I told the park about it so they could fix this, right? But nothing happened. Tell them over and over. And at some point you just realize nothing's happening. But, I really just started out because I wanted a better map for myself. Like I wasn't looking to share it or sell it or whatever. And the really cool thing, I guess the way I got started was there was an older version of the park's map online. And if you downloaded it, essentially you were able to go in and like click and drag a campsite. And so that meant that I wasn't starting from blank. I was just taking essentially an older version of their map and saying, no, no, this campsite should be over there. And no, no, this portage is over here. And you started adding to it over time and so on. And, there'd be like a book about the park, and I'd see some historic spot I want to see. So I sort of jot it down. But it really was just, one little element at a time, fixing things up or adding things on. And that's really all it was. Yeah, I mean, I guess from there, eventually I swapped it all the bits that weren't mine, that over a period of time,
Right.
and put it online because I showed some camping friends. They thought this was really cool, so I thought, okay, might as well share it with others. And that's where it kind of connects up with the bit of the story you'd said, where then I was finishing school, trying to figure out what's next, and the free version I'd put online was getting some traction. So it's like, well, this is a lot of fun. Let's give this a shot. So, yeah.
So then you became an official map maker. And I know in your first iteration of doing maps, I bought, don't hold me to it, I want to say I bought 3 of your original Algonquin maps, the sort of brown cover. I seem to only have 2, so I have to figure out which of my friends I need to thump to get back one that they borrowed, because those are for me, those are classics. Like it's what got me going. Oh, look at all the things. Look at all the interesting points that I can see, and not just I mean, I have a handful of the M&R or whoever puts out
Yep.
that the Ontario Parks or the standard this block, right? I have a handful of those. They're great in that they have a lot of information on them. You have to know what the hell you're doing in order to figure out what that information means, which is what leads me to like a part of the thing that I love the most about your maps is they're easy peasy. Like you can it has all the information there. It points out, as I've mentioned, this is a really nasty portage. You should be prepared for a nasty portage. Or it's 847 meters at regular water levels. If it's low water levels, it's closer to 1400, dude, which is great. Oh man, I could talk about all the map things. So you've spent some time. You've done so. What are we looking at? So 2012. It's now 2024. That's 12 years of making maps. What keeps you going that long to make? It must be such an amount of gathering information and tweaking things and going, I like this about my last map that I made, but I want to remake it. Like, and you're like, it's like, oh, but I made the perfect map. Well, yeah, but not now. It's not the perfect map. So how does that all play out for you? Like, how does that keep you just go, duke, I'm going to keep making all these cool things?
Oh, I love that question. That's a great question. Yeah. I mean, you, in a certain sense, you summarized it really, really well. But really what it is it's a lot of fun, I guess, working on the same project and always just thinking about it, always thinking, how can I make things clearer? How can I sort of answer the questions people have better? What are the problems people have? What do people find confusing? Because at the end of the day, really, I guess the way I see it is, that people have questions, right? You might say, hey, I want to do a particular type of trip, and this is my experience level, and this is the difficulty I want, or I want to see certain things along the way. I want to see waterfalls, whatever, right? Like those are the questions people have. And you see it on Facebook, or you see that in, people email me or in forums or whatever. People ask these questions all the time. And the kind of the fun I find, I guess, about making the map is you're trying to answer all these questions through, in a sense, these, little symbols and colors and stuff like that. We're trying to, in a sense, I'm trying to do a brain dump of everything I know, everything I've read, everything I can pull together and put it onto this one sheet. And so it certainly is a challenge, right? Again, it's a lot of info. How do you make that clear? And certainly over the years, there's bits or things where it's like I try to add a lot of info, and sometimes it gets really cluttered. Okay, so that's a problem you have to solve. You also need to make sure that sure, you're adding a lot of info, but let's say you're in the canoe and it's raining and you just want to get to the campsite. You need to make sure that the important stuff pops out, and the other fun stuff, it's great that it's there and it's really, really interesting stuff. But right now, I just want to get to the campsite. I don't want that distracting me. So yeah, I mean, that's quite a challenge. I just find it so fun, kind of always working on this, always, pondering through it, always just coming up with new ideas. And I guess in a certain sense, like that's part of the fun I find as well, is deciding, you're like, oh, okay. Okay, you're talking some of the elevation stuff, right? And the portages. So it's kind of deciding, okay, so there's this problem. In this case, it's easy to underestimate how difficult a portage is going to be. And that has implications in terms of how long it's going to take, in terms of, it's this long on the map, so I usually go that far in 20 minutes or whatever. But yeah, that's one thing when it's sort of normal. It's another thing when you're kind of going up and over a mountain or whatever, right? And so, ideally you don't want to pull into the campsite, an hour or 2 hours late at night. You're pulling at 7, you tend to be there at 5 or whatever. And so, yeah, a lot of the fun then is you start with like that sort of very basic problem, and there's no sort of answer as to like, how do you display that on the map? You have to like think through this. You have to go through different iterations of, how is it that I'm going to communicate this kind of info? What's the level of detail I want to communicate? Right? How are people going to read this? Ideally, you don't want people to have to sort of put their face right against the map, to get all the detail out. How are they going to, I guess, easily understand, this kind of, essentially what I'm trying to convey? So it's really fun then, starting with that basic idea and then working through the problem and ending out with, a new way of communicating that idea to people. So of course, on the one series of maps you mentioned, I used like the exclamation marks. So I had like, I don't remember the words I used, but essentially it was normal and then steep and very steep, something like that. And this time around for the Algonquin maps, I went in and have little side profiles of the portages. And I highlight where the hills are, so you can kind of get a sense of how big they are, how many they are, stuff like that. But that's, I guess, as well, some of the iterative sort of nature, right? Where I guess with the previous design, it's like you didn't get, for example, a sense of how many hills there are or where along the portage they are. So it's like, okay, I've done a certain level of like, before I was calling your attention to it, as you found out afterwards, right? So that's great. But then you're trying to think through like, okay, how can I, there's people asking for more detail. What is it that they want to know? Again, how can I convey this? And so it really was fun, for example, coming up with those little hill elevations. So yeah, I mean, I said it was a long-winded answer, but it really is then so fun, just always iterating.
Well, that's cool. I mean, I'm sure it's ever evolving. You're always probably rethinking. It's like, oh, how did I do that last time? Okay, so and to your point where you mentioned, how do you have it where, holy crap, it's pouring rain, or dark is coming, so go
Yeah,
pick the
yeah.
site, right? So how do I still have information on there about cool things, about this is where Tom Thompson's monument is, or whatever, without it being, but so they can make it be easily zero in on the information that I need to know right now. So I think that's brilliant. And we'll get to some of the cool newest map things. Thomas and I were both, once we realized what that was oh, it's a profile. Oh, we can plan. Oh my God. So we'll get to that in a sec. Just
Yeah.
saying. Um, so going back to, in particular, the Lostify maps is where I really started to get into your work. That was a cool thing in like you had you I think, don't hold me to exactly because that's a few years ago. But you had like special inks that would still kind of, I wouldn't say they were luminescent, but they would glow. Like you could look at them when you were doing that. I'm booking towards my site because it's going to be dark in a half hour, but you could still see the map. Like what tweaked that in your brain that I should do that? And then how the heck did you, how did that play out? Like, how did you find something that would do that? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question as well. Yeah. So it goes back to when we were doing the sort of tripping and sort of call it research, but really just doing canoe trips for like the Kawartha Highlands and Massasauga maps in like 2018 or something like that. And we were going in October, so it was hunting season. So we brought the hunter's orange just so on the portage and stuff. And we noticed that, yeah, I guess our style of tripping is we kind of start not super early in the morning. We'd be starting at like leaving the campsite at like 10, whatever. And then we do long days and we'd paddle into darkness and stuff. But certainly then kind of around sunset time, we noticed that the hunter's orange vests, they were still bright while everything else was dimming down. So it really was a question of, well, how does that work? Because that's cool. And again, like, again, talking about, trying to figure out how to iterate and come up with new ideas. It's like, how can we potentially take that thing and apply it to the map? Like, hey, you're trying to get to the campsite and the sun's setting. Is there something we can do with this? So yeah, it was just then a matter of understanding what is it causing that? Like, how do the hunter orange vests work? And can we do that on a sheet of paper? And so the answer was yes. You basically use these fluorescent inks, and the sort of nerdy technical details are what they're doing is they're taking ultraviolet light and they're converting that to visible light. So they're essentially brighter than the light that's hitting it, because they're taking some of that UV that you don't see and making it visible light. So that was the fun of it, and it's the printers. It's really challenging for them to work with the fluorescent inks. So we had two printers who, after they did a job with the maps, they're like, yeah, never again.
Oh, that's too bad. That was cool. That was cool.
Yeah.
I quite enjoyed that. And they're very colorful maps. Like, just they're fun. They're fun to look at, and again, easy to see all the colors.
So you mentioned kind of getting into this as part of your school, or as kind of while you were in school. Is your school related to this at all, or was your schooling related to this at all?
Oh, that's a good question too. Yeah, so it became related. So, yeah, when it started out, it was high school, again, like this weird side hobby. Then when I started university, it was not related. I was doing a arts type of program at York, and then halfway through, they canceled my program. So you can still finish, right? But obviously, it's a sign of not a priority, right? So I thought, I've been doing maps again as the side hobby for a little while then. And I was like, well, if I'm going to maybe do this in school, this is the opportunity, right? So yeah, then I ended up transferring essentially midway through to U of T for geography and some mappy stuff as like minors, whatever. But yeah, so
Mappy stuff. I like that.
yeah,
that's how I do it.
Yeah, I have a PhD in mappy stuff.
exactly.
That's excellent.
So how do you rate route levels in terms of difficulty too? How do you come up with the rating for that?
Oh, that's a good question. So I was going to go grab a lost time map, but they're over there. So it's actually an interesting question because it has evolved over time too. You know what? I will, just so I have a prop.
Yeah,
One
yeah,
sec.
absolutely.
Of course, I had the Algonquin ones right beside me, but I didn't think of bringing the others. So yeah, on the back here, whoop, there's the red, the orange, the yellow, and on here there's the white as well.
Right.
And so it says, going from the red down, it says extreme, moderate, mild, newbie. And then I slightly changed it up on the newer Algonquin ones. There's just 3 now, and they say typical, challenging, very difficult. So, yeah, I'll give you. I'll give you a little bit more than you'd even asked, but I think it's interesting at least. So, yeah, when I started out with trying to figure that out, part of the impetus, if you will, was I really like, I guess, some of the more difficult routes because I find it adventurous and fun and that sort of thing. But one of the challenges I face at the same time is I want to make sure that if it's a newer paddler or somebody who's looking for an easy trip, they don't essentially accidentally go and do something really, really hard. And so I thought, hey, if I can have some difficulty indicators here, then I can feel more comfortable showing routes, especially towards the harder side of things. So that was the original sort of impetus. So then, yeah, with these maps, how do we break it down? It's going back a few years. So the newbie stuff, yeah, exactly. We'll get into the Algonquin because there was new thinking there, but this is the in between. Yeah, so the newbie routes, those were essentially we want to pick a couple routes per map, not too many, but a couple routes per map, so that if you essentially had never gone on a trip before and you're like, just recommend me a trip, because you'll see this all the time, again, on Facebook and emails and whatever. Try to pick a couple essentially relatively short routes. Try to make them easy to compare. There was also in here, there's a little like chart essentially where it would sort of say, hey, I guess on the Blarney here, there's like 2 options. And yeah, there's a little chart here. And so, hey, if you pick option A, this is what you get. If you pick option B, this is what you got. They're both good options, but that's that. So essentially, those ones were just a couple handpicked ones for the first timers. And then beyond that, getting into the mild, moderate, extreme, I'll work from the extreme down because, again, the extreme were the ones that I guess really I felt I couldn't put on otherwise. A lot of them are, unofficial routes, but the routes I know people do. So yeah, that they were there. So the extreme is there essentially for those. And then the mild moderate, it's like at the end of the day, it makes sense that maybe you want to go for a nice relaxing weekend. Again, regardless of your experience level here, but you just want to go for a nice relaxing weekend, or you decide, no, I'm down for a little bit of challenge along the way. Just trying to break it down in that sort of sense. So again, that was the original Unlostify maps.
Right.
I've done a couple of versions of them, but essentially that system has remained consistent ever since. And then so for Algonquin, it's very similar, but yeah, there certainly are some changes. And so in particular, one thing, again, talking about learning and changing things up as I go, one of the things I learned is that different people understand the word extreme differently. So in particular, there's like a mech review for the Kawartha Highlands map, where the person says essentially, Jeff should stop rating routes. This route is, extremely difficult. Nobody should be doing it, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, but I told you it was extreme. And it's the sort of thing where, at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong, right? It's just that wasn't for them. That didn't meet their expectations. So it's going back and saying, well, okay, how do I make sure that I can, ideally, I still want to include these routes. I know people have done them. I enjoy them. But obviously that person sort of misinterpreted. Potentially they had done some of the, I'm looking at the back, moderate routes before, and they thought this time I'm going to level up, right? I'll try some of this extreme. But, it didn't go so well because they didn't understand, I guess, what I was trying to communicate. So on the new map, first off, I took the top end stuff. Essentially, I guess the way I split it is I said, okay, if you need to do more than bear through the pain, There might be hard routes or whatever, but as long as you put one foot in front of the other, you'll get there. Then there's routes that go beyond that, where maybe you need really good navigational skills or stuff like that, or you get lost in the bush. So I said, okay, if you need, again, special skills, essentially, those routes are the ones where things can go badly if the person doesn't understand what they're doing, right? Again, kind of going back to that example I mentioned from Kawartha Highlands there, that was definitely a very sketchy route. Like, again, I know people have done it, but like you're going through areas that essentially mostly it's just like hunters going and stuff, right? And so there's like little rough trails and stuff like this, but then you're like dragging down the creek at one point. And anyways, so I thought, okay, first off, those need to be symbolized differently, because if they don't look the same, then hopefully people don't see it as a progression of like, oh, okay, after a certain difficulty, the next difficulty up is whatever, I'm going to try that. I really want to emphasize, no, these are a different thing. So on the new map, what I did is, I'm not sure if you can see it here, but I use these like pencil marks. So they actually look really, really different than all the others, again, because the other are the three colors, the yellow, orange, and red.
Right.
But the idea there is that because they don't look the same, then hopefully nobody's going to say, oh, I want it a little bit harder than, this, now it's red. I'm going to try that next thing. Okay, so here we go.
For it.
So, yeah. So then with the Algonquin map, when I was looking at the yellow, the orange, and the red, the sort of impetus was the same, that I want to have these different groups broken down so that you can sort of make the trip that ultimately is going to meet your expectations. But I want to be more methodical and structured about it, right? Like ultimately, there's always going to be a certain level of difficulty on a canoe trip, right? That's inherent. You're paddling down the lake and there's some wind, or you're going down a portage and you're carrying your stuff, right? It might be a shorter portage, might be a little bit longer. But at the end of the day, there's also certain things along the way that you might say, oh, I want to go for an easy trip. Maybe you're bringing somebody for the first time and you're hoping to not scare them off the first time. After they're into it, then you can expose them to more. And, well, that's their problem then. But, or again, vice versa. Maybe you are the type of person who's looking to maybe put some more challenging stuff between the starting spot and your campsite so that you can leave all the other people behind. So it's really then trying to go through and say, hey, what are the factors that influence this sort of difficulty, right? So basically the approach I took is I made a big list. So you're looking at things like, I look at a little map here because I have a big chart of them here, but essentially things like the portage length. What are the steepnesses of the hills along the way? Are there any that are really, really, really steep? Or again, there's always be some hills and portages, but you're trying to separate the real killers from the fact that again, there's going to be challenges along the way, not just part of tripping. There's things like when you get into the really hard side, some of the portages aren't marked, so you need to have a sense of what are you looking for, right? Because that could certainly be quite challenging. Otherwise, you're trying to find the portage, and you're like, but I'm looking for the sign. There's no sign. Things like alder. Alder, of course, the bushes growing in from the side of the creek smack you in the face, and the spiders dropping your canoe and all that fun stuff. Log jams and narrow creeks. I mean, narrow creeks can get real fun when you can barely turn the boat. So all these sort of different factors, and trying to go through and say, hey, let's say you are looking for a nice, easy trip. You try to come up with a scenario and say, maybe somebody's taking their kids for the first time. Or maybe somebody's taking someone who, has been apprehensive of camping for the first time. So what are the things that if I said this is, typical, might push them away? So you go through and you make a list. And I guess the list I'd come up with is when it starts getting, potential for some serious wind. So you get big lakes that are exposed. I'm sure that can be scary. The real narrow creeks. The way I define it is, once it starts getting towards the width of the canoe, that can certainly just be really, really annoying. Log jams and swifts, they, certainly make things more complicated. Log jams, when you're kind of trying to get out of the canoe and drag it on over and balance on the log, that sort of thing. Swifts, of course, they're not like rapids in the sense of they're not dangerous per se, but when the water's working against you, certainly if you're going upstream, that's next level, if you will.
Or dinging up your canoe. That's
Dinging up
never
your
fun.
canoe, exactly. Yeah, when there's no signs, when you get into some of the portages that are very steep, when you start having to wade through swampy areas or flooded areas, and when they start getting longer. At the end of the day, it's always going to be a little bit arbitrary, but I went with once it gets beyond like 1.5 kilometers, let's at least start calling it challenging. And again, I guess part of my theory here is I don't want to push people away from doing the hard stuff, but I really want to set the expectations so that, yeah, maybe you are trying to do a lot of typical routes, as I call them, but you're like, hey, I'm down to do a little bit of challenging, and maybe you want to limit the amount per day, or you want to have the hard day followed by some easy days. We're really trying to meet those expectations. And then at the really high end, again, we're going between the challenging, the orange, and the very difficult, the red. That's when it gets into stuff like the alder, where essentially the river's growing in on you. You're trying to find that narrow path through the middle. Spots where there's really serious potential for wind, where things go very, very wrong. Otherwise, Georgian Bay or in Algonquin, there's certain spots on Lake
Or
Opeongo. Exactly, yeah, exactly, right. We're on the same wavelength. Some of the portages that are really, really, really long. The cutoff I came out with was 5 kilometers. At the end of the day, there's fun places you can go. But I felt like I couldn't claim that those were anything but the hardest, right? And then when you get into overgrown trails where you have to sort of stop at some point and say, "Am I in the right spot?" And then for steepness, I went with the top 10 steepest hills in the park. That's kind of an arbitrary cutoff, but again, at the end of the day, it's a very because I'm using all these numbers behind the scenes with the hills. Now that I have the little profiles, it's really just breaking down. There are some that are very, very memorable. But let's put it that way, right? So yeah, I know that was a very, very long answer, but that's the approach I've taken.
that's excellent, and that's excellent. I wouldn't mind spending just a second or two because there was a thing. Thomas and I were looking at the maps. We're planning out. We're always planning trips, and we have the nice 5 collection of the new purple Algonquins, which are just mind-boggling, dude. Thank you so much for finally putting them out. I can't imagine how much work. One of literally the first thing, and Thomas noticed it before I did, because I'm the director. I'm saying, okay, do these things. We have to get that in the dehydrator, blah blah blah. Thomas is like, so I said, here's the kind of the route that I'm looking at. Take a look at it. Like let's plan. Is that a doable thing? Blah blah blah. Because I have to do the 7 o'clock 5 months ahead. Gamble,
Yeah.
park site, right? You know that one. And he's like, "Oh, cool! Look at this." So I look, and it's a profile. So instead of the exclamation points, like the old days, it's now you can look at, and if I'm not mistaken, it's also shaded. So it not only is it a profile of the portage, so you can see where the ups are, where the potential. We're going to pause here and have a drink and eat some granola bars and catch my breath because I'm old and crippled. But it does. It looks like this is really severe. Is it maybe there's a bit of a scrabble up sort of a deal, or you're going through a boulder garden, or it's really straight up kind of a deal, it's straight down thing. How did you pull that off? And tell me, not the crappy version of the explanation that I just did.
No, that's great. And first off, I'm glad you enjoy that because that was my favorite new feature.
Sweet.
So yeah, the short version is I have a handheld GPS here, so Garmin.
Nice.
So that's how the data is captured. And behind the scenes, because yeah, you're right with the hill shading there. Since I've gone in and figured or sliced up the portage and said, hey, like, here's a steep spot, and this is how steep it is, and here's a steep spot, and this is how steep it is. And the approach I'd taken to doing that is, at least I find it interesting. So first, what I did is we brought the GPS along on the trips like normal, but all we did is after each portage, we took notes about how it felt. So in a little notebook, essentially, right? And then afterwards, after we'd gone on a whole bunch, I think that was, we'd taken notes for like 3 weeks or something on trips. So after that, you go through the notebook, and then you compare that to the GPS track, and you say, well, we wrote down that we felt, this was steep, but not too bad. Or we felt this one was very, very, very steep, and so on. So how do those notes that we took translate to the, what we recorded on the GPS? Because the GPS does record the up and down too.
Right.
And so once you did that, you're able to come up with some numbers that correlated how we felt. And so then that's where then I shaded in as one of 3 ratings: steep, very steep, and crazy steep. And that really was essentially, if you asked me, hey, Jeff, you've been on this, like, what do you feel about that? That is essentially what we were writing in the notebook. And after you got down to numbers, you can say, well, that one is the same steepness numerically. So if I felt this one was steep, I promise you that one's going to feel the same as that one, right? That was the approach we took. And the part of the thing, I guess, about the hill shading, or shading these hills in on the little graphs there, is that was one of the tricks to make it so that even though these are relatively small on the map, because there's a lot of them and you can't make them too big and fit them all on, that you can essentially read them. Because essentially it's like, what's the difference on the graph if it looks like this versus like this? It's going to be kind of hard to interpret that otherwise. But then by going in and, essentially behind the scenes doing all sorts of math and stuff, but then drilling that down to say, and it's going to feel steep in this section, that means it's going to be really, really readable, even though they're really, really small, because you don't have to go in and look at the angle of the line, right? So yeah, that's definitely my favorite feature. Both, I think it turned out so well, and I had a lot of fun designing it.
Cool. Yeah. No. Again, it's that snapshot thing. It's like when you're racing for your site at the end of the day, or in a rainstorm or whatever, you can take a quick look, and you can suck in a bunch of information really easily. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're trying to get an idea of what am I about to get into, or what do I need to do to get between here and there. So I think that's fantastic, man. That makes morons like me, makes life easy for those of us.
So Jeff, have you literally done all the routes on your map? No.
I've done a lot, but not all.
Yeah.
Like Algonquin is, where I'd started all those years ago, and I've done roughly 700 days in Algonquin, and I've done, just guessing, 70 to 80% of the routes. Because part of it is that by necessity, when you're doing, again, I drove a lot of long trips, right? But I might do, let's say, Canoe Lake by the highway up to Brent at the top of the park and take some new way back or whatever. Part of it is that you're by necessity repeating spots. And so a lot of the spots then that I haven't done, there's random little dead ends or bits that are really out of the way or otherwise inconvenient. But to me, that's also a lot of the fun, because there's always more spots to go back to,
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's cool. Envious that you can get 700. That's crazy. That's awesome. That's fantastic. Because we like to do things, we like to chat with people also about just cool trips. Something memorable for whatever reason. Usually it's because some disaster happened. If you don't mind, I would love to end this with share a memorable trip of yours. One of those 700 days.
Sure. Sure. I mean, as you're saying, there's certainly lots. Okay. So the longest trip I ever did, it was 31 days. And it was really neat because we did essentially early May to early June. This is like 2008, so it must have been high school or something like that, or university, whatever. But that's how there was a long summer. And so what was really neat was you got to see the leaves come onto the trees as the days progressed. And again, it was also a very neat trip because we started for the first week, we were with some of my other online camping friends. But what we did is we did this really unique way to get into Algonquin. There's one trail, I'll call it, on essentially towards the east side of Algonquin. It goes into this lake called White Partridge. And you're allowed to bring horses on it, of all things. So what it is that somebody in the group knew somebody else who had, like, essentially the idea is you have like 2 horses and then there's like a wagon behind it. So you can put all your stuff, your canoes, your whatever on there. You do the 13-kilometer trek in, and then you can go exploring. So that's what we did. For the first week, it was us and these online camping friends. We did some fishing. Well, I didn't fish, but the other guys did, and exploring all that. Then they went off on their way, and then we continued on. So that was definitely like a really, really neat trip. And then I guess the funny bit as well is I had never gone at that point in May. I'd done always like summer trips and stuff like that at that point. And so I packed like it was July, and we froze. We were wearing like all the clothes we had. And I remember as well, like there's one moment where we had like a pump filter at the time, right? And I was always the one to be pumping. But this particular filter, every time you did like a stroke on the pump, a little bit of water would squirt out, like a half teaspoon or something. And so that's fine in the summer. It's annoying. You wear the bathing suit, whatever. But I just remember freezing at the side of the lake, pumping the water as it was spraying out. And it's like, something towards zero. Because we actually had a little bit of snow at the beginning of June, like just little flurries, right? But just gives you a sense of, obviously there's warmer days and colder days, but and we'd hailed twice on that trip too. Yeah, so it was very memorable.
Well, yeah, that's excellent. 31 days through that time period. Yeah, you'd have weather. It's welcome to Ontario, right? So I'm sure it's one day.
Yeah.
Where's my parka for the next day? That's awesome. That's 13 kilometers in, man. That is a boatload.
Yeah. I mean, it's also neat because then you can bring in a bunch of heavy food for the first little bit. And obviously, refrigeration is an issue, but it kind of makes for a different experience. And actually, the first hail we had, literally everyone else had like left like an hour before, and then it starts hailing like decent marble-sized hail, and you're like, "What are we doing?" Oh well.
Well, you're young and invincible. That's fine. We'll get through this, right?
Exactly.
Well, it was
exactly, and we did.
When you mentioned earlier, I'm going to finish out with this. You mentioned earlier about what is somebody's extreme versus your extreme. It's not only different perspectives, different people. I can tell you that my extreme 15 years ago is different from my extreme today. Right? Like my experience level is up. I can't run 15-kilometer races anymore. So, right. So it's all about perspective. You take everything with a grain of salt.
There's a lot of variables. Yeah, you have a lot of variables.
There's a lot of variables.
You can't account for what weather might do when someone's on their trip.
Yeah. So there's a new whatever. It's we had a ton of rain and now it's run a bunch of it's what do they call them, boulder gardens, because it's pushed a bunch of rocks down that weren't there before, or it's doubled the amount of rocks or whatever. So yeah, cool. I greatly. This is fantastic. I want to go have maps in my hand.
What are you working on now, Jeff? Just out of curiosity, what's your current project?
Oh, that's a great question. So actually what I'm doing right now is I'm kind of changing up behind the scenes how I make the maps, because one of the biggest challenges has always been, I have a lot of source info, because essentially my mindset of how I make the maps is I want to grab from kind of everywhere possible and accumulate it together, I guess, to make this really, really rich picture of the park. So things like, I'll be talking to friends, people email in, you get scientific reports, you go through trip reports, YouTube videos, old maps, books, whatever. So, one of the things that I really want to work on, I guess, making easier for myself is taking all of that input stuff, putting it essentially into a more organized system, and then also making it so that through that, I really want to be able to make multiple maps of the same area, which might sound weird, but it's because I like to make, for example, a backpacking map that looks different and works a little bit different. I'd like to make some topo maps for doing off-trail stuff that look, a little bit different. They have some slightly different info and so on. And so, again, like right now, the map essentially is like a poster. So if I change the campsite on, a particular map, well, I'd have to go change it, let's say 3 times if I had 3 different maps of Algonquin. So, I'm really trying to change things up so that this whole process of going from sources to making the maps is a lot more efficient, so that it's going to be easier to maintain them.
Yeah, that would make sense if you're going to do, and that's perfect too. Like even a canoeing map, a backpacking map. There's what do they call them now? Overlanders, whatever.
Yeah.
Right. That sort of thing. But if you make a change on one map, wouldn't it be lovely to populate in my other 2 maps? Yeah, I hear you, man.
Exactly. But, again, that's part of the fun as well, that I really find it interesting to go through and think about, okay, what are the different needs that a paddler has from a backpacker? What are the different needs that somebody going bushwhacking over land has? There's obviously a lot of similarities. That's why I kind of enjoy doing these maps. They're in a very kind of narrow domain. But there are different things that matter to these different groups and different ways of communicating. And anyway, so it's a lot of fun.
Cool. Yeah, now I'm thinking about like, okay, logging roads wouldn't be as important to me if I'm canoeing, but if I was overlanding or hiking, if I wanted to try to change up my route or something, I'd want to know where those logging routes are.
Exactly.
So much planning.
Yeah, I mean, obviously water matters. No, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah.
So how can people get in touch with you, Jeff, if they want to connect with you?
Oh, great question. Yeah, so my website, if you can't see my shirt, but I'll stand up. My website is mapsbyjeff.com. Yeah. And of course, if you want to reach out by email or something like that, it's on the website, but it's jeff@mapsbyjeff.com. And on Facebook, it's facebook.com/mapsbyjeff. And I guess finally, Instagram, and this is the only one that's different. It's instagram.com, I guess, /maps.by.jeff. Somebody else taking maps by Jeff. But it'd be great to hear from the listeners.
Sweet. Yeah. And I'll put it out there as well. If you pop into any of the Facebook, pretty much any of the camping groups, but in particular the backcountry groups, Jeff's is an often responder. I'm not sure about the contributor, but I often see a question about something about in a park, whatever, and Jeff often comes in with a fantastic answer for it. So there you go. There's how you can hook up with the dude. All right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's it for us for today. Thank you so much to Jeff McMurtry from Maps by Jeffs for joining us. And if you would like to reach out to him, he's given you the info, mapsbyjeff.com. And if you'd like to reach out to us, we would love to hear from you. We're at hi@supergoodcamping.com. That's hi@supergoodcamping.com. And we're on all the social media, and you can find all the links on our website. And if you would like to subscribe to us on YouTube, we would love to have extra subscribers there. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.